See if you remember this. Quote, the organizations winning this battle aren't outbidding competitors. They're offering phased retirement programs, flexible scheduling, clear advancement pathways, and structured mentorship. They're treating physicians like professionals building sustainable careers, not revenue-generating assets to be optimized. Professionals building sustainable careers, not jobs, but careers. It's like music to my ears. Do you remember writing this?
I do. I don't think it's unique to physicians, but I think it's a message that oftentimes gets overshadowed.
Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I am your host, Lee Scheinbart, and along with a fabulous team at the CMO Group, we bring you the most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership. The CMO Group is the only physician-run and physician-led organization focused on chief medical officers and exists to transform how physicians lead. The group helps CMOs and emerging physician leaders move from expert operators to enterprise leaders through a unique transformational process. Healthcare doesn't just need good doctors and leadership, it needs high-powered executives with deep medical knowledge, and that transformation is the work of the CMO Group. Our guest today is Carrie Gorel, the CEO of the Association for Advancing Physician and Provider Recruitment, AAPPR, the only professional organization where physician and provider recruitment leaders and others who influence recruitment, onboarding, and retention can connect, learn, and advance their careers. Carrie is not only a seasoned and respected clinician with a master's of social work, she is also a seasoned CEO, having led the International Association of Forensic Nurses for more than a decade before taking the role as CEO for AAPPR and to lead it for the past decade. For those who do not know, forensic nursing is a highly specialized field at the intersection of healthcare and the criminal justice system, where registered nurses provide trauma-informed care to victims of violence, abuse, and trauma while collecting legal evidence. Carrie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. You have such an incredible background within the domains of social work, the work with trauma-informed care, your work in criminal justice, and now you oversee a large organization literally focused on advancing the mission of how to effectively recruit and retain physicians and other providers. And as I shared with you a moment ago, we've been spending a lot of time on this topic lately, and I know you have some key insights. So we'll get into the questions in just a moment, okay?
Okay.
You caught my attention a couple of months ago about recruiting in healthcare when you posted this comment online, and I absolutely fell in love with it, and I'm going to read it for the audience. See if you remember this. Quote, the organizations winning this battle aren't outbidding competitors. They're offering phased retirement programs, flexible scheduling, clear advancement pathways, and structured mentorship. They're treating physicians like professionals building sustainable careers, not revenue-generating assets to be optimized. Professionals building sustainable careers, not jobs, but careers. It's like music to my ears. Do you remember writing this?
I do, and I think I try to share this message often. I don't think it's unique to physicians, but I think it's a message that oftentimes gets overshadowed because the work of physicians is so often, it's not their own, it's everybody's. So it's an important message.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, so let's just start right there and get into the question. So from your vantage point in this physician, provider recruitment, and healthcare leadership landscape, what do you think about health system leaders that they misunderstand about the physician workforce today compared to in the past?
Well, we can't start off any conversation with just acknowledging we've got a pipeline issue when it comes to having enough physicians. And of course, we can't solve a 10-year physician pipeline problem with a 6-month hiring solution. So I think oftentimes what gets misunderstood is that, we have to look at the bigger question. What sort of physician organization are we building 3 years from now, 5 years, 10 years from now? It's about strategy. It's about intention. It can't be a transactional hiring activity. We're talking long-term. We're in it for the long term. We got to plan for the long term.
Yeah, I think you're right. And for the longest time that I can remember, recruitment lived in somewhat of a siloed part of our organization, thinking about, like you said, here's our timeline. Here are our needs. Let's fill these gaps. And while they understand, the HR team understands the organization, they may not have that wider vantage point that you're discussing. And if those nuances are not shared, it creates a bit of friction, right?
It does. It does. And we can't afford turnover. It seems that we have reluctantly acquiesced that turnover is just going to happen. But I would say it is paramount for us to not accept chronic turnover as just an inevitability. I think that is a result of the fact that we're not thinking about our workforce, our clinician planning, the type of organization we're trying to create in that long term.
Yeah, yeah. No, we recently had a guest say, stop thinking about your physicians and your other provider staff as staffing. It is a workforce, and you want them around for a really long time to help shape and drive the culture and the outcomes. Would you agree with that?
I would. In any organization, right? Again, it's not unique to physicians. I think it's just oftentimes overlooked when it comes to physicians that that this is about building culture and sustainability. I mean, patients don't want their physicians to change
Right.
every 3 years. I mean, this is a system that will thrive on stability.
Yeah, yeah. You couldn't have stated that more clearly. Patients, no matter what we think about the modern era, still want a relationship, lasting,
No.
long-term relationship. And that is part of human nature, to feel safe and secure.
For patients, it's all about it. There's vulnerability. There's an intimacy that happens around people who understand just things that patients maybe won't share with anybody else other than their care provider.
Absolutely. That's true. In our prior discussion, you hinted at physician recruitment teams will perform very well when they report to a chief medical officer, and organizations are still shifting how all that works. In an ambulatory setting, when you're working in clinics and staffing around the clinic, I do see more of the chief medical officer having that role and responsibility, but it's not as obvious, or at least not as transparent inside the hospital setting where so many different things are happening. Are there any other structural changes that you are aware of that either create friction or problems or could be better relative to assigning the CMO some responsibility here? How do you see that structural organization?
Well, I think physician recruitment is fundamentally part of clinical workforce planning. It's not just talent acquisition. And the challenge that happens sometimes when physician recruitment falls under TA is that it starts to get treated just like a general HR workflow, and it loses that clinical and strategic function. There's also something to be said about when physician recruitment leaders are closely connected to the CMO or to other clinical leaders. They're just going to be able to recruit better, understanding what is needed clinically, understanding a department, a physician culture within that department. I mean, there are so many things that don't appear on a job description. There are also so many things that don't appear on a physician's CV. And having someone who is experienced in having those clinical and administrative conversations is, we just see that it helps. And a physician candidate also wants to know that the CMO and their physician leaders are involved. They're involved in the process. And that doesn't seem to happen when there's a big disconnect. So even if a physician recruitment department has been moved to fall under TA, which, we're slowly still starting to still see that trend as organizations are trying to reduce their own internal silos and communication challenges, there still needs to be a line for physician recruitment to that CMO. It's almost to the point of, I don't care where they report to, keep that line to the chief medical or other clinical leaders, keep that line strong.
Yeah, I often will share with aspiring and emerging physician leaders, you are the doctor's doctor, and never forget that. And you are always on stage relative to the other doctors. They want to know you, see you, hear from you. They don't want you all day, every day, because they have patients to take care of.
Right.
but the door has to be open. Your cell phone number has to be shared. And there are different ways to get to know the different folks in your organization, but it is an imperative. And I'm hearing you say a very similar theme. When I first started, when I was a CMO, the role of the CMO in onboarding was not very well understood. I wonder if you have any thoughts about at the very beginning. So now that the talent team has begun to source the right individual, how does that onboarding experience shape the relationship between the physician and the CMO in the organization?
Something that we'd like to say in recruitment is that onboarding begins with recruitment. And that certainly our candidates are assessing us and our organization from that initial connection point. Could they find us? Could they find out where to apply? Were we responsive? What was our own behavior like in that process? So when it comes to onboarding, candidates want to see that the CMO is visible, that they're active from the start. Because what it does, and I think this, our audience knows this, right? It tells the candidate that leadership truly has influence inside the organization.
Yeah.
So in onboarding, the CMO, they need to make sure that the candidate is not just operationally processed, but professionally integrated, that it goes beyond orientation and knowing where your parking space is. But it's a multiple point check-in over a span of time to make sure that they're integrated.
Yeah, that is very sensible and logical, and I know back in the day that was not an obvious conversation for people.
No.
It's certainly gotten a lot better. So for some of our listeners, they may not be all that familiar with the notion, and obviously it depends on the size of the organization, but a medium-sized health system or hospital organization will have HR, just many, many, many functions.
Yes.
And then within that, we've talked about talent acquisition, which is the getting people to our organization, like you said, from the very first minute. Were we accessible? Were we responsive to your needs? Did we explain ourselves and brought you in? But then there's this whole external search firm universe. And I wonder if you have experienced some misconceptions and maybe help our listeners understand the capabilities of what's in-house and what's external, and maybe the role that you and your organization play in all of that.
Well, I will say, I have worked with consultants for many years on a multitude of things. And one thing that I know firsthand is that I cannot outsource someone else to do my strategy.
Yeah.
And so, there are certainly people I will hire to help me build or complement or help me understand a strategy better. Perhaps I'll even hire different people to help me execute pieces of it. But I think what the audience needs to understand is that we as the organization need to have our own internal strategy, and that our partners, our external partners, are there to enhance it, are there to extend it, but they're not to do it all for us. And I think that's oftentimes what happens with search firms, especially with organizations who are perhaps young or immature in their recruitment strategy, who haven't yet adopted and seen like this is a longer workforce planning. And so there's sort of two camps. There are the camps that have a strong in-house recruitment function, and they need to occasionally extend their reach and are going to partner with an external firm. Then there are those organizations who don't have any staff, who don't have a strategy, and they end up outsourcing the entire piece of it. One mistake I often hear is that it's thought to be that the hard searches automatically require outside help. And when I hear that, usually it means the organization just hasn't invested enough in their internal recruitment function. They're largely doing the same thing, except you're now paying 3 times, 4 times as much to have someone dedicated to that one particular search. The pool of candidates is the pool of candidates. And it's just who has the time and the resources to sort of work that pool, but who also knows the bigger strategy of your organization and can communicate that and make sure that it, not just in the identification and initial interview, but in the entire process along the way, including onboarding and including that engagement with the CMO and other position leaders, that's still going to be your in-house team. Let me just pause there because
Oh, yeah. Well, you don't have to. My light bulbs are going off. I'm having all these epiphanies when I think about the universe that I used to live in. The most important message that I would translate to our listeners from what you just said is you may have to outsource just simply because of resource constraints. But what you miss in that translation, if you will, is extending your culture's mission, your organizational feel about things, what it is you really want to impart to the physicians and other providers that you're recruiting. And so if you do outsource, if that is just a requirement of how you're structured, please, please, please make sure that those teams reflect who you are and what you're about, because a lot will get lost in translation if the candidate can't feel what that organization is all about and they just feel a workflow or a process because it's an intermediary. I'm curious about your reaction to those statements.
In agreement. And I would add, if the decision is made to hire a firm, please, please, please ensure that they are connected and partnered with your in-house team. Your in-house team has a lot of experience working with a variety of external partners. They, because of the AAPPR membership, are also connected to a wide group of people who have had their own experiences. And different firms have different niche markets, areas where they can be more successful than others. And I think the in-house world really understands that it's not a replacement. It's a yes and,
Yep.
like they say in improv.
Yeah, I love that. It's a yes and. And then the other side of this entire equation is sometimes organizations default to old behaviors or less than best practice, where we'll talk about physicians especially being treated as somewhat of a commodity. I can just hire these people to fill in these gaps in our recruitment plan. But when physicians feel that way, either when they're recruited or within their organization, I'm wondering if you've heard from colleagues in this universe what that looks and feels like and how that translates.
Oh, yeah. I hear it consistently from members. When a physician feels like a commodity, it just weakens the entire organization, right? They show up, but they're not engaged. They feel like a widget, an asset. And I don't know that any person, a part of any organization, wants to feel like a thing. So, when treated like a commodity, like we know it's going to be less likely to invest in governance, mentorship, innovation, culture building, which are all the things that attract candidates to our organization. So it is a vicious cycle if you don't break that one, before disengagement really just becomes a retention problem. And then this is again where you have that churn. And we've mentioned on previous conversations that, when it comes to physician, it's not all about compensation. And we find this as well. Physicians are looking for the right schedule for their family, for their work, for their lifestyle. They know they're going to work hard. They know they've got a long career. And I think physicians are looking at the long game of how do I stay in this career and protect my own well-being while doing this work. What happens when we've, again, got that churn going is that while compensation isn't necessarily the driving force, when you have to rehire, you're now rehiring at the higher market rates. So we're really creating, I guess, another storm that I think recruiters are already aware of. Some CMOs may be aware of, where you have your long-standing retained physicians at one salary band, and then because of the churn, the new physicians coming in at a higher band. You really have to watch the equity that happens in how we're compensating across the board, I would say it is much more cost effective to keep your physicians in so many ways than it is to keep hiring at the higher rates.
Yeah, people who have been in this universe for a long time, sort of my age or older, understand the cost of losing physicians and recruiting physicians, but they don't think about the savings on the retention side. So you end up getting a real twisted economy of you lose somebody, then you hire the locums. The locums makes more money than the physician wants to go out and become a locums and come back to the organization. It's an upward cycle and spiral for which it has no ceiling, and the cost will go up and up and up.
And the
If you
morale goes down and down and down.
Yeah, yeah. And so to your point, retention is the way to manage that effectively and then go back a step. The younger physicians that are entering into employment models these days have a very different approach. And like you indicated, so while we're going to check the office space, available procedural items that they need in their clinic or in the OR, and you do all of that operational stuff, then it's like, what does your family think about education, and are they going to have opportunities for their where they want to live and how they want to? All of those other non-office or non-hospital based questions should be equally important on that onboarding and satisfaction question,
Mhm.
because if you don't address that, they will leave within 2 to 3, whatever the contract length is. They'll either break it or leave because they're looking for something else, and then know the compensation is out there, but they're
Mhm.
looking for more. And I'm sure you're hearing this about the younger demographic these days.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely hearing it more so. It's even more of more of a priority, and it creates that second challenge of our retiring physicians, and the pace of work that they sustained is not something that the younger physician generation is interested in continuing that legacy.
Yeah, and you mentioned, and I failed to bring this up earlier. So while you're bringing newer, younger physicians into the organization, you're having seasoned, very productive, different mindset
Mhm.
physicians who are looking at the end of their working career. And maybe you bring them into the organization, but then how will you slowly transition them to where they want to be? What does retirement look like? What does a part-time opportunity look like? Would you be willing to mentor the younger physicians to bring back a little joy of teaching and supervision? So I think there's sort of a checklist for the younger folks, as well as an equally important checklist for the older ones, even if they're leaving with a planned date. How do you do that? Have you any experience or conversations about
Oh,
that group?
yes. And we are not having nearly enough conversations with our soon to be retiring clinicians. Like, recruiters see it all the time, and they can see the horizon as like, why aren't we already succession planning? Even if it isn't for 2 to 3 or 4 years down the road, some specialties do require that type of planning horizon. And I rarely have met physicians who want to leave 100% like day one and never do medicine again, right? Like, this is their identity. This is who they are. It's what they know. So allowing those, like, all those ideas you just mentioned, to sort of slowly phase out an organization that can be flexible and nimble, that isn't necessarily what I think of when I think of healthcare. But if it's part of your clinical workforce long-term strategy, those exits should have just as much emphasis placed on them.
Yeah, yes. In fact, I'm living proof of that. When I retired, I had no idea what was going to happen to me. I found a hobby called a podcast. Now it's become a monster podcast, but that's my fault, no one else's. Yeah, you have to work with your folks and help understand what that transition is like. And I agree that, of course, there are physicians who said, "I've had enough." I get
Yeah.
that, but a week doesn't go by where someone doesn't reach out to me and say, "How do I teach your medical students that you're working with? How do I provide, a club support or mentorship, or how did you source part-time work at the VA or the local clinic?" And I've done all of those things, and so I know that they're out there, but no one's talking to them about it. So
Hmm.
I agree with you. I want to shift and talk a little bit about a unique notion that has been lost over the decades. When I was in practice early on, I had a lot of autonomy.
Hmm.
Of course, we were captive by the sense that we were professionals and we had to self-regulate and manage inside the hospital people whose quality or behavior was not appropriate. And that goes on and on and on. But as employment becomes a larger structure for physicians, like it or not, the physicians, both young and old, have lost a feeling of autonomy, or at least semi-autonomy. And I'm wondering if your years of experience, you have some thoughts or what you hear from your members about how do we support physicians in some type of autonomous functionality in the workplace?
Well, I think it's important to start out that I think employment and autonomy don't have to be opposites. They are not the same coin that you have to flip. I think there can be room for both, because in an employed model, I think it's important for physicians to have a sense of agency and voice. And we've talked about this before. That we want to know that people have influence and voice and that they will actually be listened to. I mean, the employment model is here to stay, I think, for a while. It offers resources, infrastructure, relief from administrative burdens. This is why a lot of people have gone into the employed model. And health organizations also understand that in order to meet their bottom line, like this is a model that people can grasp and understand. And they're looking for stability. They're looking for safety, not to take 100% of the risk on their own. So, shared leadership is really important in an organization, right? I don't know that they need total independence. I don't know that even in private practice, maybe you didn't even feel like you had complete independence at that point. There's still a lot of people counting on you and needing you. But that there's still opportunity for meaningful participation. Again, this is not unique to physicians. Anyone's spouse or kid or parent or friend, like they want agency and a voice in their employment situation, most likely as well. So, as long as there's pathways for physicians, I think that organizations can thread this needle with some intention.
On two ends of the spectrum, and you know this as well as anyone, there are organizations where physicians, as well as administrators and other members, don't feel comfortable talking up. The loss of voice means a loss of agency and a loss of value. The other side, the complete opposite, is if you give those, again, any organization, we're talking in this case about healthcare and physicians, give them a voice in some way, shape, or form and listen to them.
Yeah, leaders need to believe this themselves, right? Because leaders will tank this as quickly, much quicker than they can build this. They really need to embody this as a philosophy in order for this to work. And I will say when it doesn't, it is a failure of leadership.
Yeah, as we study and do our research internally in our organization around leadership development, when you listen to people, they feel valued, they feel their worth go up, they gain a sense of autonomy and agency, not necessarily with decision making, but the value that they as a person bring to the organization. Mm-hmm. It's critically important. And yes, it starts with the leaders. It starts at the very top. And all of what I think we're dancing around, you and I, is what culture looks and feels like. And if you don't embrace the notion of listening to people, supporting them, giving them some voice, you're not going to have the optimal culture. And you're going to go back to that attrition issue that we started with. For many other reasons, people leave organizations, but almost invariably people leave because of a bad boss. And in the same breath, you could say, or a bad leader. Yeah. Same difference. Yeah. And it's an incumbent thing that, and we know from our internal research, if you develop your physicians into leadership opportunities, and not everybody wants it, but if you do, their organizational attitudes increase significantly. Their commitment to the organization, they share the vision, they know where they're going, they take problems on for themselves. Mm-hmm. And that is a demonstrable way to activate some of these things relative to agency and autonomy and governance. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I will just add, I think that builds loyalty and that builds trust. And if you have loyalty and trust in an organization, regardless of the reason why a physician may leave in the future, they can still be a brand advocate for you. They can still talk positively and recommend your organization to others. Like, not every exit has to be a negative one. Quick aside. So AAPPR does research every year where we track 15,000 searches from the previous year. And one of the key metrics is how many days did it take to fill that position from the point it opened to the point that the contract was signed. Sidebar, it can take twice as long just to get them onboarded and credentialed. Doesn't mean they're starting, but we've been tracking this metric across 86 different specialties for the last 15 years. We also track what is the most common source for the candidate who's successfully hired. The number two source is our internal referral, that a physician referred somebody else, whether it was someone inside the organization or external. When that happens, we reduce time to fill by 3 weeks on average. In 3 weeks, if you look at the cost of all your revenue lost when a physician position is vacant over the cost of 3 weeks, I mean, you can start to get into the hundreds of thousands of and millions of dollars, depending on the specialty. Loyalty is a value add. And if there's not another reason why as CMOs, you need to look at how your leadership shows up and what sort of culture you're contributing to. If for nothing else, like build trust, build loyalty, it does help the bottom line as well as just make everyone a lot happier.
Yeah, no, I listen, there's no physician out there that's going to automatically trust a recruiting organization unless they themselves work there. Mm-hmm. But they know somebody who knows somebody who works there who trusts them and smiles. And look, nobody's perfect. And so there's always going to be some concerns that come up in a private conversation. But by and large, your best recruiters are those that are in your organization, that are physicians that know other physicians. 100% every day of the week and twice on Sunday for sure.
Yeah.
Well, your insights and the role that you play about the world that you sit, that intersection of physician and provider recruitment and having all this knowledge that you have, this has really been very important, I know, for myself and for the listeners. Do you have any last thoughts or words that you want to bring to the audience before we wrap up?
Well, I would say that recruitment is the front door to your physician culture. So pay attention to what that front door looks like, how fast it opens, that it's inclusive, that it's wide, and that there is good things on the other side, right? Every physician who walks through it, they're going to decide whether they're going to stay and whether they bring anyone else with them. So front door.
I love it. Now you want me to run home. I feel like running home and painting my front door with a new color and opening it. But then I might have some, transient people just stopping in to say hello. So I've got that on my mind. Anyway, that's a beautiful analogy, and I think it works exceptionally well. Well, thank you for sharing your energy and your passion and bringing that information to our listeners today. It's been fantastic. You have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. You want to learn more about how to think differently about your workforce, about recruitment, about retention, to create sustainable careers both in and out of your organization with your people, then contact Carrie on LinkedIn. That's how I connected with her, and it has been a fabulous connection so far. You want to learn more about transforming your own career and becoming a CMO, then connect with me and I'll set you up with the CMO group and everything you need to lead in healthcare. I love talking with CEOs and CMOs from all over the world. So please get out there, develop your recruitment strategy, your clarity, your culture, open up that front door, set your people up for success. But remember, whatever you do, look out for yourself, be careful, and be good to others.